Hi, and welcome to today's 4-Minute Mark. We are in Mark chapter 8, and we're going to start with verse 14 this time. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, "It is because we have no bread." Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, "Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" 12, they replied. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" They answered, 7. He said to them, "Do you still not understand?" What is it that the disciples don't understand here? Well, one thing they don't understand is that Jesus can provide their needs. They have seen him feed 5,000 people and 4,000 people with basically next to nothing. And now they're concerned because they only have one loaf of bread. Jesus reminds them of those miracles here. Realize that you are not getting it. You are not getting who I am. And you're not getting that the power of God is with me. That's one thing they're not getting. The second thing they are not getting is that God does a lot with a little. Okay, you've got one loaf. God can still do something with that one loaf. Just as Jesus did when he fed the 5,000 and the 4,000 with just a few loaves and a few fish. God can do a lot with a little, which is encouraging to us. God can do a lot with your little efforts to teach a Sunday school class or whatever little things that you can find to do for him. That's great. God can bless those and magnify them. Another thing the disciples are not getting is that Satan also can do a lot with a very little. The Pharisees, right before this particular passage, had asked Jesus for a sign, even though Jesus had performed many signs that could have convinced them. But there's a little bit of unbelief there, and that spreads through the Pharisees and spreads through the Pharisees' followers. So Jesus says, beware of the yeast of Herod and the Pharisees, the unbelief and the attitude that we are against what God is doing. A little bit of that in your heart will start to grow and grow and grow, and it will come out. So Jesus says, beware the yeast of them. Just as we had a little bit, and God did a lot with a little bit, Satan can do a lot with a little bit too. Yeast, you take a little bit, you put it in dough, you don't have to use very much, and the dough rises and rises and rises, right? So Jesus is saying here, beware of the yeast. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. And once again, the disciples show that they are kind of thick. When I was going through the Gospel of Mark once with someone who had never gone through it before, and maybe I've told you this before, but we'd come to passages like this, and they're all the way through the Gospel of Mark, and he would always say, the disciples are just so dumb. They just don't get it. And I would remind him, how many times is God trying to show us something and we don't get it too? Okay, that's it for today, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.